Over the course of the last year, a lot of crypto has been beating itself up over crypto's performance in the markets. Why can't we be more like gold? Why can't we be more like the equities markets? Why can't we be more like the big AI companies? But it's easy to forget that crypto didn't come from times like these. Crypto was born out of financial chaos, failure, existential crisis. Crypto can do just fine when everything's going well, but crypto was actually made to be really valuable when everything goes wrong and the medicine we use to treat the patient injures the patient more than the disease. If the only disease you're trying to catch is a giant case of inflammation of the crypto bagitis, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. Let's see who we got here. D.U is here. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. David M. Jensen is here. Let's go. Let's go. Fly Over Me is here. Glad you made it. Let's go. Yep, this one is gonna be carpool safe. I'm gonna try. Don't hold me to it, but I'm gonna try. Hilldog is here. Thank you for joining. Neo Chat is here. BindoCam is here. BindoCam's filters back on for the nope. This should be carpool safe. I can't guarantee it though. I can't guarantee it, but it should be. My intention is that it should be. Jay Marie is here. Thank you for joining. Yep. Okay. G-rated. I don't know who. I don't know what the Christopher reference is, but yeah, we'll try to make it carpool safe. Squirt Skateboards is here. Let's go. Eric Williams is here. Let's go. Liam Bana is here. Good to see you. Yeah, you made it. You made it this time. Good to see you. If you're still here, I'm assuming you're still here. Let's go. Donkey Net is here. Sir James is here. Let's go. Let's go. It is the start of a beautiful new day. Gary H. Yep, that's a beautiful sentiment. A beautiful sentiment. Frazik is here. Hilldog is here. Dr. Doke is here. Future is here. That would be a black swan. Yeah, that's right. Let's see. I think I already got Hilldog. Hilldog is definitely here with popcorn and a beer. That's a good combination. Mission Zambi is here. Good morning. Jose is here. Hello. Hello. Lone Eagle's here. Kim Cha-ching is here. James Syracuse is here. RCA is here. Otis Frityov is here. Ada Fox is here. I think we already got D.U. Ada Eclipse is here. Okay, I think we got Elliot Adam is here. Light the Gill. Light the Gill is here. Yo, what's up? Rulo is here. Hola. Okay, we got it. We got everybody. Yeah, everybody's here. Great. So I watched a clip today and somebody pointed something out that reminded me that we sort of expect crypto to both be sort of like a beluga whale and a shark and like an anchovy simultaneously. We expect it to be like these diametrically opposed, in some cases, things all at once, which is kind of impossible. It's sort of like we all got sucked in by the idea of this hard cap currency that would be the ultimate hedge against debasement, right? That's the picture that's painted in the Satoshi white paper. And then simultaneously, it's sort of like, oh, we're going to build out a bunch of like cutting edge tech stuff along with it. We're going to do all this tech stuff and we're going to onboard like dApps onto the blockchains. And so it's really going to be like a tech stock. So we sort of expect it to be like a tech company in the equities markets. We expect it to be all these things, which it kind of can't. It can't sort of simultaneously be all these things. And it's also like the world's most pristine collateral. I would argue if you are self-custodying your own crypto and it's a crypto that's hard capped like Cardano or Bitcoin, it's sort of the world's most pristine collateral. The Bitcoin maximalists like to say that's only Bitcoin, but as we've discussed, The only difference between Bitcoin and Cardano is sort of how we select who gets to validate the block. And then after that, I mean, it's Nakamoto consensus on our side. So I would argue they both fulfill that criteria of being the world's most pristine collateral, as long as you're holding it in self custody outside of a smart contract. But we can't really expect crypto to be all of these things at once. It's sort of like expecting Nvidia stock to be Nvidia, but we add in this weird feature where we're going to manufacture the GPUs at 3,000 different facilities around the globe. And actually, the way it's going to work, every time one of these facilities manufactures a GPU, they also get some NVIDIA stock and they can instantly sell it if they want to. Right? It's like, what would that do? What would the price of NVIDIA look like if that were the case? Right? It might be wildly different if that's the way NVIDIA stock had worked all the way up. And likewise for any tech company, like you can't really compare this weird decentralized movement we're in, that's all about being this giant hedge against debasement and also being this super ultra pristine collateral, the likes of which the world's never seen before, and also have it behave like, some kind of like hyper growth tech stock. You can't really be all those things at once. This is the anchovy trying to be a great white shark, also trying to be a beluga whale, right? You can't be all these things all at once. And it sort of leads us to focus on the tech stock role that we sort of shove crypto into. We sort of look at the equities markets, we look at the, like the gold market, we look at all these different markets, and we're sort of like holding ourselves up to it just on that one metric. Number goes up. Like, and to be fair, we have destroyed virtually any other asset in the world over the course of the history of crypto since 2009. We've kind of destroyed all of these other assets. In terms of that one thing, number goes up. So we sort of expect Cardano and every other crypto like it to do that thing as well. But that's not really the big thing. That's not really the most significant thing it does. The most significant thing that hard cap cryptos do is something that almost no other asset can do. And that's when we have these big unexpected events, these big black swan events. How does the government handle that? Well, we've seen how the government has handled this a couple times. And you don't have to take it from me. We can hear this directly from Lawrence Leopard. So listen to what he says. Listen to what he says about this. I think you guys will be able to hear this. If the audio is really low, let me know, and I'll just repeat what he's saying here. Okay, Daniil's saying no audio is coming through. That's good because he already broke the carpool safe thing. So that's good. I'm glad you guys can hear that. Basically, what he says though is he says, "Hey, we're already seeing cracks in the system. We're already seeing these cracks in the system." He's like, a couple decades ago, everybody would go into work in offices. He gives a few different examples, but this is probably the most notable one. He says, a few decades ago, everybody was going to work in offices. Then this whole COVID Zoom thing happened, and all of a sudden, everybody figured out they could just work from home. So the location of our workday changed for a lot of people, and this has had this tremendous impact on commercial real estate. This is just his example of one of these kind of events, right? Like nobody really predicted COVID. Okay, maybe some scientists, doctors predicted COVID, but none of us were listening to them. COVID happened. It was very unexpected by the entire globe. It changed the way we worked, and it definitely had this deleterious effect on commercial real estate. That's never really materialized, right? We all know a lot more of us are working from home than ever have before. And partially it's technological, partially it's just cultural. Everybody got used to working from home during COVID. But there are way fewer people going into offices than there were when I started my career. Now it's been like sort of 25 years ago when I started working for real after school. Everybody I knew worked in an office, and all my friends, we all worked in offices, in the downtown area of where we lived. And that's all changed. Everybody I know works from home. So he makes the point, obviously, the commercial real estate is not worth what it was back in those days. The number of tenants, in those office buildings is much lower. The amount of space they're using is much lower, but that had never really surfaced in the markets. So he says, obviously, somebody lost money here. Somebody's lost money, and maybe that's being hidden in the insurance companies. Maybe the insurance companies have these big losses on their ledgers that they're not really acknowledging. Maybe it's the regional banks. Maybe the regional banks have these giant losses. But he's saying these losses have been hidden somewhere. This is just like one example he's giving of something that could materialize. And if something like this finally materializes, even though this is something we're kind of all aware of, it would kind of materialize as a black swan, because we all saw what was happening to commercial real estate. We all experienced that on a very personal level. If we were, people who went into work previously and suddenly started being able to work from home, and it kind of never changed. Sure, a lot of people went back to offices, but it's different. It's not the same number of people. We're not using offices like we were before. So if those losses do suddenly surface in the markets, if the magnitude of those losses becomes apparent to everybody simultaneously, sort of like it did in the GFC, suddenly these hidden losses become apparent to the entire market. All of a sudden, the values of institutions change overnight. And he points out, we know what the reaction to this is. We know what medicine the government doctor is going to give to its patient, the economy. The medicine is, and he paints it as a binary choice: either suffer economic collapse or suffer sort of an instantaneous bout of hyperinflation. They're always going to choose hyperinflation. They're going to print. Anytime these black swan events come around now, they're always going to print, because they've already made the choice twice not to accept the economic collapse thing. So we can see this in the Fed balance sheet, right? Everything's pretty flat, right? Like this is all pretty flat. And then what happened? GFC, what did they do? They printed from a little bit under $1 trillion here to a little bit over 2 trillion. That was gigantic at the time. We're talking like 100% increase. And then they sort of go along here. There's more printing. All of a sudden, we're at 4.5. We're at 4.5 over here. And we kind of know what happened, right? Right about here, we had a big crypto parabolic high event. Over here, we had a great crypto parabolic high event. And then we get to COVID, right? Another big black swan event. What do? They print, they go from a little over 4 trillion all the way up to almost 9 trillion here, right? And what happened? This is right about, let's see, where are we at? Right about here in September 2021. This is when even Cardano went up to all-time highs over $3, right? Down around here, in early 2018, at times we're buying below 3 cents. And up here, all of a sudden, Cardano is worth $3. So we know he is right in that we know what the government is going to do. And when I say the government, we're including the Fed, right? Even if you want to exclude the Fed from the definition of government, it is definitely governing our monetary base. It is the government in terms of how many dollars are going to be in circulation. We know what they do. We can see it right here. When there is a black swan, they are going to print. And actually, he's making the point here that this is actually when crypto is the most valuable. And it's not always apparent, because what happens in these incidents, when this happens, all assets suffer, and crypto will suffer in one of these black swan events, right? At first, crypto is going to suffer. And then they start administering the medicine. And the medicine devalues the dollar, but it debases the dollar. It is the debasement of the dollar, but that's when crypto shines the most. I think it's easy to lose track that this is the real use case of crypto. This has been the real use case all along. This is what Satoshi was writing about when he included that text in the Genesis block, when he said chancellor on the brink of bailing out banks. This is what he was talking about. This was the reason for being of Bitcoin and the reason for being of all of crypto. We've added a bunch of stuff on, a bunch of stuff that makes it look more like a tech enterprise. But this is the real reason it exists. It's because nothing else helps you during these kind of events the way that crypto can. Sure, you could buy gold, but we all know the parameters of that discussion. It's sort of like, yes, obviously gold, but you can't move, millions of dollars of gold around the globe in 5 seconds for 5 cents like you can Cardano. So I thought this was something relevant to keep in mind, especially during these times. Like, crypto wasn't made specifically for times like now. It was specifically made for times like these. It was born because of this one right here, and it shined during this one right here. And will it happen again? Probably, because it's been happening pretty frequently, right? It's like we had the dot-com crash back here, even off this chart. We had the dot-com crash. I lived through that one. I watched a lot of people lose a lot of money in the dot-com crash. Then probably most of us remember this one, and we all kind of lived through this one. These will probably keep happening. This is when crypto really shines. So let's go to the comments. Cardano Universe is here. Hello from Nick. Hello, Nick. Are we in an AI bubble? This is a very good question. Are we in a housing bubble? Another good question. Are there a bunch of losses that haven't been fully cognized by the market in commercial real estate? Another good one. Thoughts on age of disclosure? Ooh, I could talk for hours about age of disclosure. I'm gonna have to do another alien rumor rundown. I would love to talk about that right now, but this is the Cardano rumor rundown. So we'll talk about that though sometime. When Solana received USDC, it shot up 1,200% in 99 days. Yeah, I mean, I hope we see positive effects from, the critical integrations in Cardano as well. But there's no guarantee because it didn't go as well for Algorand. Right? Algorand doesn't claim the same story. They don't tell the same narrative about that. Dr. Doak says, I think COVID was expected by Fauci and Gates. Yeah. A lot of the evidence is kind of pointing in that direction, isn't it? The everything bubble. Yeah, we've been talking about this for years. We've been talking about the everything bubble for years. It's like the question is whether they've gotten so good at printing their way out of problems, whether we see the same kind of like instant popping of the bubble like we saw in the GFC, right? Like that was sort of this overnight thing that just very traumatic thing that happened, like a car accident. COVID was kind of a self-inflicted wound. Obviously we saw that one coming. But the next one, if it's a true black swan, more like the GFC, suddenly everybody realizing that credit default swaps were not a healthy thing. If it's something like that, it's like, is it going to be this dramatic event, or do they see it coming this time and do all the sort of, pre-injections of liquidity to smooth the pain? We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, but it is apparent to me that this is really what crypto was made for. Like, I'm glad we're doing all the stuff we've done, all the programmability we've added, the dApps, all of the expressiveness we've added to crypto. I'm glad we've done all that stuff, but this is the really big use case for crypto. This is the time when you really want to have crypto, when the black swans come around and there has to be a big print to get our way out of it. That's when crypto has been really valuable. And it seems like you would almost argue the devil's advocate argument would almost be like, yeah, but that's so infrequent. You can't even plan for that. But if you look at it, I mean, we're looking at 2008 and then, basically again in 2019. So these aren't that far apart, you know what I mean? And then you had the dot-com bubble, you know, uh, a shorter distance in years from the GFC. So, I mean, we're kind of hitting these pretty often. So I think it's valid to say that this is like, maybe the biggest use case still of crypto, just like doing well in this kind of environment. Hilldog says secure public settlement. Cardano equals secure public settlement. The midnight layer equals private compliant smart contract layer. Together, they equal a complete system that matches where the entire crypto space is heading. Yeah, I think that's true. Lone Eagle says just send $10 of Bitcoin and it'll cost you 1 Bitcoin. Yeah, it's the fees over there are not as good as our fees for sure. Cardinal Universe says I watch more crypto videos than many, and I notice patterns and bias, similar views and sentiment, along with some smart perspective by experts. Yeah, I think that's any genre of videos on YouTube. You'll see. I think you'll see exactly the same thing in almost any like interest niche on YouTube. But yeah, you're right though for sure. And along the same lines of this discussion, like, is it worth it? Is that use case really worth it when, these events might be happening like a decade apart? Obviously 2008 to 2019, we're talking about 11 years there. Here's something that's also easy to forget when we've had a year like 2025. So this was an interesting post. This post is about Roger Ver, who some of you might know him as Bitcoin Jesus. So this post says Roger Ver's legendary Bitcoin bet. In 2011, Roger Ver bet that Bitcoin would outperform every major asset on earth: gold, silver, stocks, and real estate. Bitcoin was trading at $10. Today, Bitcoin is 85. So when was this post? This was probably, nope, it was today. Okay. So he's saying today, Bitcoin is in this range. Anyways, that's a total return of 849,000%. For comparison, gold has gone up 183%. The S&P has gone up 320%. Real estate has gone up 120 to 150%. Depends on the market, really. There've been some pretty high appreciation markets, unfortunately, for people trying to buy houses in those markets. But he points out a $1 investment during Roger Ver's bet would now be worth $8,500. A $1,000 investment would be worth $8.5 million. 14 years later, the verdict is obvious. Roger Ver made one of the most accurate and symmetric trades in financial history. So, a big part of this is this sort of Roger Ver bet. I think a lot of you probably know that Roger Ver later on, the US government kind of went after him for tax evasion, even though he had turned in his citizenship. He was no longer even a citizen of the US. They went after him for tax evasion and were holding him in a jail in Spain. We covered it on this channel. But this timeline they're talking about from 2011, it only covers one of those big print episodes. It only covers the COVID big print episode, right? If we go back here to this quantitative easing event, this was all over. They're just counting from right here. So this Roger Ver timeline they're talking about, it only covers this big print event. Sure, I mean, we went from like, a little under 3 to 4. That's actually a giant print in and of itself. But then this enormous one with some drawdown to here, the number would have been even higher if this post had been made 3 years ago. But this is only one of these big print events, and the numbers look like this, right? So it's pretty easy to criticize the performance of crypto, as compared to Nvidia, any successful AI company right now, successful just in terms of how their equities are doing in the markets, but it's tough to argue with the track record of crypto over longer timelines. Like I think a lot of us can say we've lived through a number of bubbles, and even in the comments here, we've talked about multiple different types of bubbles we might be experiencing right now. But crypto seems to just, it seems to be that ultimate hedge to the debasement, to the big print episodes, no matter what. Every single time people call crypto a bubble, every single time it happens, but crypto was sort of designed to look like a bubble every time we print our way out of one of these big disasters. Hill Dog says, just don't say that word. And I didn't intentionally. That's a whole story on its own. Cardano Universe says, Paul Barron put out another piece on Charles and Cardano, which he really does, but he clips 1 minute out of a 30-minute video of Cardano's problems and leaves out the good news. Like, of course, I think we have many critics like that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so Roger Ver, no, he's a big blocker. He was a big blocker, actually. He bet on the big block side of that civil war, and the small blockers won. But that's true, though. That is what happened to Roger Ver. Hill Dog says that person is the worst. So, anyways, I don't think they're sort of holding up Roger Ver's choice in the Bitcoin block size civil war as the important part of this. Just sort of the timeline, the fact that he was sort of proselytizing the Bitcoin message at this time, and that if people had listened to him, they would have experienced these kind of gains. And it's because this is really what crypto is made for, just the whole concept, right? Obviously, you could argue that things like Cardano was made to do other things, having to do with all the properties of a Gen 3 blockchain, expressiveness, proof of stake, all those things, heightened security. But really the whole concept of a hard capped cryptocurrency, it's really this use case here. And on a long enough timeline, it's been phenomenally successful so far. So the point I'm trying to make is, yes, 2025 has sucked, but there were also a lot of years on this timeline that also sucked, right? It's like all these years where you see the curve heading down, all these periods where the curve headed down, those were not the great years, right? These little flat sections or these downward sections in all these little sections of quantitative tightening, all of these were not great for crypto, largely. And look what we've just lived through. We've just lived through this gigantic episode of QT. We went from almost 9 trillion all the way down to we're something like 6.5, a little over 6.5 right now. Finally, QT ended 2 days ago. We've just lived through probably one of the hardest times in crypto, 2025 being just the culmination, the apex of all of that. 2025 was kind of the crescendo at the end of the worst, 3 years you could ever imagine for crypto. So here's to better times ahead. But if the USD devalues, won't crypto when you convert it to fiat? Yeah, and even in that video, like Lawrence Lepard in that little video clip, even he says, he's kind of trying to make it clear that people should be mindful that when everything crashes, Bitcoin will also crash. He's talking about Bitcoin in that clip. I think it applies to all hard capped cryptocurrencies like ADA as well. He's like, crypto is going to crash as well when everything crashes during these black swan events. But where crypto shines is when the government administers the medicine, which is the big printing events, the debasement. Their medicine is always going to be debasement because they're faced with this choice of inflation or economic collapse. They're always going to choose inflation, right? They're always going to choose inflation. They've done it 2 times in a row when faced with that choice. They're always going to choose inflation. And that part, when they start administering the medicine, that's when crypto is going to shine. But if the USD devalues, won't crypto when you convert it to fiat? Yeah, I mean, it's like, so when you convert, if you go to sell your crypto and you convert into fiat, the the thing to think about is the fact that the reason why it's so painful, the reason why debasement is so painful, debasement wouldn't really be painful for the average person if wages kept up with the inflation, but they don't. They lag heavily, right? They lag heavily. And, a lot of people are holding fiat, right? It's like, what is your savings account denominated in? If you're in crypto, it might be crypto, but for most people, it's dollars, right? If they're in the US, their savings account is in dollars. So their savings account gets debased. Their wages, the purchasing power of their wages, their salary, gets devalued. However, if they're holding crypto, when they go to sell into crypto, if they were holding their savings account in crypto as opposed to USD, they can convert into that higher inflated level of crypto, right? If they just held through the debasement, they just got debased. If they're holding crypto, they can now trade that crypto for the inflated value of the USD. So there you go. Bitocam says, yeah, but once the money gets to be free, we go back to super degen mode. True. If AI creates this like era of bounty and plentifulness that Elon thinks it will, then everything changes. I mean, it's a totally different economic system if that's the case. What is Free Show says, I listen to streamers like Paul just remind me that we are going to make it. They purposely do not cover Cardano because they know we have it all together. Yeah, and I'm kind of with Otis Free Show here because if you kind of want asymmetries of information, right? If everybody understood what we understand about Cardano, we would not be ahead of the curve, right? If everybody would price in everything we know, but the vast majority, all the rest of crypto basically doesn't know about what's going to happen next year. They don't know about what's going to happen at midnight. They don't know about the critical integrations. That's the asymmetry of information that is to our benefit. I wonder if our Japanese investors would have preferred USDT over Cardano. Just to be contrarian, I wouldn't be mine too. I mean, they did fantastically. I mean, have you seen the ICO prices? Have you seen the prices they bought at? They've had multiple chances to kill it. The Japanese investors and there were a few other investors from different parts of Asia. The Cardano Foundation used to have a breakdown of the ICO on their website, and it showed the prices, how much was sold at those prices, all the different tranches, the geographic location of the buyers, and they've had multiple chances to kill it. Like this was the greatest investment. I was happy where I was able to buy in Q1 2018, but the Japanese investors, they've had multiple chances to kill it. I don't think any of them would have preferred to be holding Tether during that period. So they did much better. They had multiple chances to kill it. Tulane Tulip, AOS, genuinely curious. Aside from Cardano's ecosystem, what are a couple of projects that you personally find value in? Bitcoin. So, the vast majority of my portfolio is Cardano, and the next biggest chunk is Bitcoin. So, hidden stimulus everywhere until midterms. This is what I think is good. This is what I'm suspecting is going to happen. It's like the way I make this case to myself is, why would he not do it? Why would the Trump administration not do it? Is there any incentive to not do it? There's every incentive in the world to do it, right? And he's already laid out a bunch of ways they're publicly going to inject us with, various types of stimulus. Okay, sorry guys. Sorry, I think I accidentally touched the mic. So sorry. So sorry. I accidentally touched the mic. I'm back. I'm so sorry. Um so sorry. Okay, I get a little behind in the comments, so I don't even see it when you guys start saying hit the mute button. Let's see how. Okay, it looks like only like a minute or so. The first message I'm seeing about the mic was at 9:35, 10:35. Whatever. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it looks like it was like 1 minute ago. Looks like it was 1 minute ago. So, I'm not sure how much. I think you guys got most of the answer to that question, but I think they're very happy they were holding. I think they were very happy they were holding. They were holding Cardano for sure. Let's see. Did you see the 40-minute talk by Cardano critic Justin Bonds, where he talks about the way forward for crypto in EDM world, and he basically described Cardano and what Cardano is doing? I definitely do not watch that channel. So I did not see it, but I think that's a pretty big theme right now. One of the funniest things going on for Cardano was how much Ethereum is mirroring Cardano. This has been happening for years, but their latest pivot toward functional programming is the most hilarious because that's one of the things we've been criticized the most for, our choice of Haskell. And now, of course, we're seeing Ethereum. We're seeing Ethereum transferring to functional programming concepts. So Pucky Hawk says Trump account for babies. That is amazing news. Nothing to do with crypto, but all babies are going to get an index fund account for 18 years. Yep. 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 So, okay, good. I'm glad I was only muted for a second. I'm gonna try to stay up to date with the comments. I try not to miss any of the comments. That's why I kind of get behind. But yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to the next topic here. So we got Roger Ver. So this is kind of interesting. I try to keep up with these little. I try to keep up with these little releases from IOG. This is called Cavefish. This is called Cavefish. Before we move to Cavefish, S. Walker, dog had a birthday today. Had me pick up a fifth of tequila, and a poodle. Puppers is down now. I'm glad to hear the dog had an excellent night. It sounds like an excellent night. I like the fifth of tequila. What kind of tequila are we talking about here? A nice añejo or something else? Reposado? What kind of tequila was this? Okay, Cavefish. So they mentioned that traditional light clients for blockchains like Cardano and Bitcoin faced trust issues, high data demands, inefficiencies, especially for mobile or low resource users relying on centralized services. They say that Cavefish is a communication optimal protocol from IOG for UTXO blockchains. And I like that they're starting to like sort of point everything at Cardano and Bitcoin. I like that we're like already sort of ramping up like, hey, we're both UTXO. You know, this is all ooh, Don Julio. I like okay. Okay, which Don Julio was it? I like that though. Pucky Hawk says it's his birthday, but he's snowed in. So he's making patty melts and drinking milk. Milk even. Wow, okay. So I like that they're sort of ramping up the Cardano and Bitcoin sort of being brothers thing. I think this is a great idea. Like when we talk about stuff we're doing, making it super obvious that it applies to our UTX brothers over there in Bitcoin. So this is kind of interesting. They say how it works. A light client submits an intent to a service provider. And you guys probably already know this is like a big buzzword right now in crypto. It's like, you know, everything is an intent. Everything's being painted as an intent. So how it works, a light client submits an intent to a service provider, which creates a blinded transaction for the client to verify and sign using privacy preserving cryptography and automatic fee handling. Think of it like a custom meal. The user shares their preferences. The chef prepares the meal without revealing the final dish. The user approves and the tip is added automatically. This process lowers entry barriers, reduces trust, incentivizes decentralization. So they say Cavefish is currently in its early inception phase. Milestones include work on protocol specifications, prototype security analysis, and the CIP. So that's not a very good, I feel like that's not a very good explanation, but down here gives you an idea of what they're actually talking about. So they say Cavefish is a communication optimal like client. It allows users to describe what they want to do, such as send 10 ADA to a friend or mint a new token without knowing the current ledger state. A service provider, typically a full node operator, handles the details, building the transaction and automatically receiving a small fee. So this is kind of interesting. So we could have a very dumbed down blockchain experience for people through this kind of intent handling. So it sounds like literally somebody could describe, do blank thing on the blockchain. That's a valid thing you can do on the blockchain. And then here we've sort of transitioned to full node operator because stake pool operators are going to be doing multiple things now with the addition of these partner chains. But you'd have basically what we think of today as like a stake pool operator handling everything for that person, building the transaction, receiving a small fee for the transaction, just doing all the stuff. So you'd have this super dumbed down kind of experience where you literally just communicate what you want to do, and then some stake pool operator takes care of it for you. This is a wildly different experience than the one we have now in crypto. Okay. No, what is CARF? I don't know what that is. Brian Packard, good evening. Good evening. Good evening. So Cavefish, I think, is something to keep our eyes on. There's a lot of people talking about intents in crypto right now, but I think this is kind of interesting for exactly the reasons they say here. Cavefish lowers barriers to entry, fostering broader adoption. So it's I'll be curious exactly how this is going to work, because you are sort of introducing this intermediary step with this service provider, right? And obviously this can be decentralized just the way our validation of blocks is decentralized, but you are sort of interjecting this intermediary in the transaction. And maybe that's worth it. Maybe the additional adoption we get with this is worth it, because maybe the people who would use this kind of service would not be willing to do blockchain stuff without that kind of service. And the people like us who value the sort of peer-to-peer, non-intermediary kind of process are never going to use this anyway. So maybe we don't care. But I think this is an interesting development. They keep mentioning it's in the inception phase. So this is a ways off. This is not anything that's going to happen tomorrow, but I wanted to point out that this is something that's going on as of yesterday. Two-Lane Tulip says, do you see USDC on Cardano as a net positive or as a negative to our integrity and vision? So it's a double-edged sword, right? It's sort of necessary for us to be in the same category as our peers, right? If we ever want to be treated as being in the same category as, anything in the EVM or Solana virtual machine world, the SVM, if we want to be on the same footing as our peers, we probably have to have it. Is it great though when we know that Circle is more than happy to freeze USDC and do all these kind of things? Is that the kind of stablecoin we want people to be using ideally? No, not at all. I would prefer that nobody's using a stablecoin that can be frozen. But then again, can you get the kind of stable coins we would prefer in crypto? Can you get those past the regulators? It's like if ISIS is using stable coins to transfer money, and the regulators, there's no possible way to freeze those transfers. This is obviously hugely problematic for our sort of AML frameworks. We're going to talk a little bit about these kind of topics in a second here, but I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's a double-edged sword for sure. Taxation, cross-border reporting of personal info to foreign countries for IRS. Oh, this is like the travel rule. We're talking about like the travel rule. Okay, U.S. does not join the global plan, but has its own protocol. Yeah, I agree with so Secretary of State Rubio addressed this a little bit in he gave a few sound bites on this exact topic. Yeah, obviously we're not going to let any kind of global sort of protocols for this Trump US, no pun intended, Trump US law. How it applies to crypto gets really interesting. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit about these kind of topics in just a second. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people probably want us to join, all these kinds of global frameworks. We must be playing more DJ Ed tracks. Who's DJ Ed? Who is that? Braxton Tokyo, thank you for joining. The dog, S. Walker says the dog said Rubio knows all about the UFOs. Yeah, apparently he does. It sounds based on age of disclosure, it sounds like he does. Although he walked that back a little bit like yesterday. Oh, I see. Jed. Very, very nice play on words, Mission Zambia. Very, very funny play on words. Yeah, we it'd be better. I think, obviously Cardano's original plan was that we would have, our own algorithmic and asset-backed stable coins, JED being the algorithmic stable coin, the most prominent, and, a number of asset-backed ones like Moneta. But there's the standard tier one stable coins have become so universal in crypto. We're obviously being forced into joining Circle's vision of the world. So, there we are. But okay, let's move on a little bit here. So I thought this was kind of interesting. We talked about what was going on in the overnight repo markets, and I saw a lot of posts like this one. So this was a post yesterday on the 2nd. Fed just pumped $13.5 billion into the US banking system through overnight repos, the second largest liquidity injection ever, just behind COVID. So this is not a very nuanced depiction of what actually happened. We talked about this on the channel, but if you notice, yes, right? If you go back, so this is what happened during COVID. We had these gigantic injections in the overnight repo market. This one was 61.5 billion, just before it 55.2, 55.3. Here we have 49.75. So gigantic injections. And then prior to COVID, like nothing. It just wasn't a tool they used in the same way prior to this, Back here in the dot-com days, you see some bigger injections over here that probably looked monstrous at the time, but they're only like 11.5. But actually, what's interesting is everybody reported on the 13.5 injection, and they didn't talk about the 29.4 at the end of October that we talked about on this channel, right? The real story, and in fact, if you look at this, if we go to like a 1-year view, let's go to like a 5-year view. Let's see if it shows us a little bit. Yeah, if you go to like a 5-year view, you can see these values. But when people just sort of circled the giant, and you can see here from their chart, like this is actually including the giant end of October spike in the repo market. That's 29. Right. And then everybody's reporting this as the 13.5. I thought that was kind of interesting. And in case you don't know what's going on with these markets, here's what these markets do. So they tell you right here on Fred. They explain it to you in pretty straightforward terms. Repurchase agreement is a transaction in which the Fed, under the authorization and direction of the FOMC, buys a security from an eligible counterparty under an agreement to resell that security in the future. So all you need to know about this is that in a regular overnight repo transaction, they are pushing money out into the markets and taking in securities. And this is different. A lot of people get confused. This is different than a reverse repo transaction, where Fred tells us again, a reverse repo agreement is a transaction in which the Fed, under the direction of the FOMC, sells a security to an eligible counterparty. So they're pushing a security out in the markets and they're taking in the liquidity. So liquidity is getting sucked out of the market in the reverse repo transaction. And you can see here, that's what was happening all the way up here from 2021, all the way up here. And then that just kind of got drained ever since 2023. Those went down, 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 down. So they were sucking less and less and less liquidity out of the market. Of course, this is almost exactly at the same time that all of the QT was happening. And over here, these are the transactions where they're basically pushing liquidity into the markets, and they're taking in securities in exchange for the liquidity they're pushing into the markets. But I thought it was kind of interesting that everybody just kind of like blindly in crypto is like, yep, the number's 13.5 billion, but then they're circling the spike that's actually the previous sort of injection that was a 29 billion injection. So BindoCam says, I think the stablecoin liquidity will bring in people with it, which can spread value to other native stables once they get comfy. I hope so. USDC is a must. Yeah, I mean, there's, it kind of sucks that it can be frozen. It's not really permissionless, but I agree. At this point, it is a must. Let's see. Cardano Universe says, I disagree with U.S. government forcing U.S. exchanges to give U.S. Coinbase customers personal info, including social security number. They're even discussing DeFi. Yeah, we're going to get into the DeFi part of this. So this has been going on a long, long time. Articles about basically the IRS forcing big exchanges like Coinbase to hand over customer information. Like, this goes way back in the history of Cardano. I remember this was going on in like 2015. I've said this many times on this channel, but it was somewhere in that 2014, 2015 period, somewhere in there. I had just paid taxes on all of my, at the time, Bitcoin transactions, I think. Might have been into the Ethereum days if it was a little bit later, but it might have just been Bitcoin. I had paid all my taxes on all my crypto gains, and an article came out in national publications that only like 400 or 500 people had actually paid taxes on crypto that year. And like I've said many times, I felt like at the time I knew more than 500 people who were using crypto at the time. So people were really not paying taxes much in crypto. Probably still the case to a large degree. And the IRS was already going after Coinbase on it. They were already making Coinbase hand over the names. Or at least that's what we were reading in the press anyways. They say it's for criminal money laundering, but not everyone is a criminal. Yeah, I mean, they want to know the numbers regardless. They want to know who's transacting in crypto. They're the IRS. They're the tax collector. They're going to want to know, and it's everybody else's job to push back when they want to know too much, for sure. So here are some of these issues. Here are some of these issues being argued from a couple of different parties. So one of them is a professor who teaches crypto stuff. The other one is Citadel. I'll let you guess who is more pro-crypto and who is more anti-crypto on that. You can kind of tell already from this image. This is the professor's article he wrote about some of these issues. And he's got the image of the guy going to access his DeFi funds and encountering the iris scanner. So the most important part of this article are the bullet points he lays out. So his bullet points are: privacy equals investor protection. So a lot of this is going to boil down to how we treat DeFi, right? A lot of the things the professor writes here have to do with crypto generally, but think about this in the context of discussion around how we're going to treat DeFi. So he says privacy equals investor protection because wrench attacks are real and transparent ledgers create physical danger. Privacy directly serves the public interest. You know what a wrench attack is? This is when somebody kidnaps you and they beat you with a wrench until you give them your seed phrase or the pin to your ledger or whatever. They're just going to beat you until you give up your crypto secret words so they can access your funds. This actually happens. This happens all the time. He gives an example of an Italian, I think it's in this article. Here he's referencing the travel rule right there. I think he gives an example of, maybe it's not in this article, but somewhere I thought he gave an example of an Italian crypto investor suffering a wrench attack in New York back in May. Here we go. May 2025, an Italian investor was held captive and tortured for weeks in New York. There are hundreds of similar documented horror stories. Wrench attacks, how criminals bypass cryptographic security by threatening physical violence, and it is very real. So he's mentioning wrench attacks here, and that's sort of like his explanation of why privacy is important. I think we would all argue privacy is just a fundamental right we should all be expecting and exercising. But I think he's trying to give non-crypto people sort of a foothold to understand why we're so obsessed with privacy. His second bullet point is blockchain base layer neutrality matters. Infrastructure layers like Ethereum or Base must remain neutral, permissionless, and open. So I think Ethereum is sufficiently focused on permissionlessness. Base, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, Base is not even decentralized yet. They say they have plans to be decentralized, but we'll see. I would almost argue that permissionless is only maintainable if you're decentralized, right? Otherwise, the permissionlessness is always going to end when the authorities come knocking on the centralized authority's door. Third, non-custodial means no KYC obligations in DeFi. So this is the important part of all this. The part of this is going to be most most immediate because this is the big discussion that's going on right now. Non-custodial means no KYC obligations in DeFi, consistent with FinCEN's recognition that non-custodial actors are not money transmitters and therefore outside of their own regulatory perimeter. This is a really important point. If you don't know, FinCEN are the ones that all the AML reports go to. You're probably aware that all the big financial institutions, when you use your credit card, when you use your bank account, whatever you're doing on TradFi rails, the institution you're dealing with has a bunch of people somewhere who are called AML analysts, and they just write SARs all day. They write suspicious activity reports, and they send them to FinCEN. And then FinCEN decides if they refer those SARs over to federal LEOs, basically, who are going to go investigate it. So FinCEN recognizing that non-custodial actors are not money transmitters is super important here, because the second they don't think that non-custodial actors are not money transmitters, that means DeFi platforms are going to be given definitions they don't want to have that are going to require them to do things like AML and KYC. We'll get into those categories in just a second here. So his fourth bullet point, hang on to that one though. The third one is definitely the most important for this discussion. Fourth, blockchain tech exists to eliminate financial intermediation and enhance asset owner sovereignty. Without that, there is no point to it. I agree with this strongly. The whole point about blockchain technology is disintermediating financial institutions, basically, and increasing asset owner sovereignty. So this is kind of the approach of a professor who's a crypto guy. So, and I believe he's going to be participating in some kind of an SEC roundtable. Where is it? Yeah, I am honored to speak at an SEC led by Chairman Atkins. And I think this is some kind of a roundtable he's participating in, but obviously a pro crypto guy. Then we have this letter from Citadel. This is the exact opposite. This is the exact opposite of the crypto approach. So Citadel, obviously, giant TradFi institution. What do they not want? To be disintermediated. They are the intermediary. Their whole business is being the intermediary. They do not want to be disintermediated. Like Satoshi was talking about institutions just like them. When he wanted to create this peer-to-peer network, the whole reason it was peer-to-peer was to disintermediate institutions like this, not because they're evil or immoral or anything like that. It's just that crypto is a better way to do all of it. It's a better way to do all of it. Disintermediation has to happen if blockchains and crypto are going to have value. So here's Citadel's reaction to that. They're basically writing this letter to the SEC telling them their opinion on all this. They say, in this letter, we recommend that the commission identify the intermediaries that will be involved in the trading of tokenized US equities. So the reason why they're jumping in right now and they care so much is because they realize that sort of the dawn of tokenization of stocks, US equities, is imminent. This is all imminent. And they're like, whoa, we're about to get disintermediated out of our most important, the most important thing we do. Like our whole business is getting paid as the intermediary. If we get disintermediated, this is existential for us. So they start by saying, by sort of masking this presumption, it's sort of a masked presumption that the DeFi platforms will be intermediaries. This is important. They're not saying like, hey, we believe you should view the DeFi platforms as intermediaries. They start by writing this in a persuasive way and saying, oh, there's going to be intermediaries. That's a given, and you just need to identify them, right? Knowing full well the only entity, the only item that could be identified as the intermediary is the DeFi platform. So they say, first, identify the intermediaries who will be involved in the trading of tokenized US equities, including via so-called decentralized trading protocols. So they're saying it as if that's just like one of the things they're thinking about. That's the only thing they're thinking about. They're just thinking about DeFi platforms. That's all they care about here. Identify the intermediaries. They're saying, hey, there's a person behind all this. You need to identify that person. And then they say, refrain from granting broad exemptive relief. So they're saying, don't exempt them. Don't exempt them from the long-standing statutory definition. So don't exempt them from being called an exchange or a broker-dealer if they're going to be facilitating the trading of tokenized US equities. So they're trying to claim a couple of things. The DeFi platforms aren't intermediaries, and they are exchanges or broker dealers. The problem with this is that means they would have to do all the AML, KYC stuff, and we already know the DeFi platforms have no ability to do any of that stuff. They wouldn't really be the DeFi platforms as we think of them today if you had to KYC before you use them. That's not permissionless crypto. That's something else. That's sort of permissioned centralized crypto. That's not a DeFi platform. That's basically just Citadel. They're like, hey, DeFi platforms better look and act exactly like us or they can't exist, right? So while getting disintermediated is existential for Citadel, what they're proposing for DeFi platforms is existential for the DeFi platforms as well. Jordan for America, thanks for dropping in. Antonio Credit 34, thanks for dropping in. Let's go. Let's go. You can't let people have their own money, then we can't use it for ourselves. And that's where Midnight comes into play. It's not necessary to send people's private account data to a foreign government for privacy concerns to protect people from criminals. Yeah, actually, ZK Technology has an answer for this. I mean, this is why Charles utilized ZK Technology in Midnight so that you could prove you are not the terrorist or narco trafficker and not give up all your data on the transparent blockchain. Puppers wants to know if you have kiddos or a dog, girlfriend. What area are you from? Tell Puppers, those are details I cannot divulge. I cannot divulge those details, unfortunately. Cardano Universe says, we know there are criminal elements at a certain telecom, therefore Coinbase should not be overlooked. Tell me about the AT&T thing. I don't know about that. The wrench attackers, AI enthusiasts, the wrench attackers will give up when they go through their 10th 2021 CNFT decoy wallet. Yeah, that's definitely a strategy. I mean, if they've still got you duct taped to the chair, they might just continue beating you with the wrench. I guess that's what they did to the guy in the Italian guy in New York. So I guess you want to be free from the duct tape by the time they discover the 10th decoy wallet. But this is kind of where my mind goes, though. This having 10 decoy wallets is also kind of where my mind goes. It's like, let them find the NFTs that are now worth 1 cent. They can steal those if they want, but they should have to wade through all those before they get to anything valuable. Okay. Yeah, I think this is the important part from this Citadel letter. But you can tell where it's going. They know this is existential for them. So they're like, and they kind of have a point, right? They kind of have a point. They sort of know that this is existential for them. And it's sort of like, why do the DeFi platforms get off the hook? Why do the DeFi platforms not have to conform to the same broker dealer and exchange rules that we've always had to conform to? Why don't they have to jump through the same hoops we had to? And of course, the answer is decentralization. We're sort of making this policy decision. If things go the way we want them to do, we're sort of making this policy decision that decentralization is something different and good, and it does exempt you from these same requirements. And part of it is because you can't really be, minus ZK technology anyways, you can't really, minus zero knowledge proofs, you can't really be decentralized and still do all the things that Citadel has to do as a broker dealer. So that's where that goes. Yep. It's the internet. There are bad people out there for sure. There are bad people always watching. Cardano Universe says phone company was busted for a bad actor whose name was never disclosed, where the employees SIM swapped customer SIMs and stole money accounts. Oh yeah, that's happened. That's happened for sure. For sure, employees of big telecoms have SIM swapped customers and stole accounts and things. Yeah, that's definitely happened. Then the Edinburgh Decentralization Index enters the room. Yeah, this is where things can get real spicy for a lot of other blockchains and real good for Cardano. So part of the deal, I think part of the thing they're running into with part of the thing they ran into in creating the Clarity Act and the Senate counterpart to the Clarity Act, the market structure bill, whatever it ends up being called, right, is like, as they try to draft something that works for everybody, I think what they run into is it would be really easy to draft a definition of decentralization that includes things like Cardano, right? You can make the threshold real high and basically only Cardano and a few others would qualify. But then huge amounts of money in crypto would end up on blockchains that don't qualify, right? So especially if you go by the, actual scientific measures, peer-reviewed measures of decentralization, like the Edinburgh Decentralization Index, very, very big popular blockchains with a lot of money on them are not going to qualify under those definitions. So I think as sort of legislative staff started trying to figure out how to draft those acts, they started running into that, right? They're like looking at how many validators, like what's the Nakamoto coefficient of this blockchain, and then they realize it's really low, and they're like, wait, like three people could reorder the ledger on this blockchain that, talks about decentralization all the time? How is that decentralization? So they had to come up with like totally different ways of describing decentralization. And then they're like, well, who makes all the decisions? And then they find out like, oh, it's just like, the like 10 people on this foundation, and one guy just admitted like, 11 months ago that he names all the people on the foundation. There's totally no decentralized governance there. Once again, only Cardano really fits the bill. So despite the crypto sector talking about nothing but decentralization to policymakers, when it's down to brass tacks and you start asking questions like, okay, what's your Nakamoto coefficient? Like, how many parties would it take to do malicious stuff on your blockchain? How many, to like reorder the blockchain? How many people are actually making the decisions? Do you have any kind of decentralized governance? Like, if you don't have decentralized governance, how can you claim to really be decentralized? Like, proof of work blockchains have a workaround for this. They can just say, well, any any branching of the chain would require all of the validators to point their ASICs at the new chain, right? That's a form of decentralized governance because every validator would have to jump onto the new chain, so they've got a little bit of workaround. But if you're proof of stake, like Ethereum currently is, you've got a big problem. And then the legislative staff trying to draft these acts has a big problem because they're like, okay, well, when we actually try to measure your decentralization, it seems like you guys aren't really that decentralized. So I think there was a big balancing act because they knew that they couldn't really pass a bill that disqualifies a chain as big as, Ethereum or even Solana. A lot of top 10 blockchains are huge problems, like Binance. Like, forget about Binance. It's like even Ethereum would be a problem. So I think that's part of the problem with the with all this. So here's a few people commenting on Citadel's letter. Block Prof. This poster says, "Wow, this is a professor of forensic accounting and corporate securities banking law, crypto policy." Says, "Wow, Citadel just declared war on Project Crypto, taking up arguments made by Gensler in his failed attempt to regulate DeFi and attacking the points made by Commissioner Pierce." That's Crypto Mom. Commissioner Pierce in her dissent. The opposition letters will be extensive. Stay tuned. Jake Chervinsky, who's one of our best crypto policy lawyers, says, "Whoever thought Citadel would be against innovation that removes predatory rent-seeking intermediaries from the financial system?" Oh, right. Literally every single person in crypto. I think that is true. This is also an interesting post. Zero Hedge. Bond investors warn Treasury about Hassett as Fed chair, according to the Financial Times. Related, crypto investors praise Hassett as Fed chair. This is pretty much what's going on. I thought this little meme was appropriate. Bond investors worried about Hassett are just the tip of the iceberg, and the mass of the iceberg down below is crypto bros throwing a welcome party for Hassett. I also liked this one. This one made sense with me. This rang true. This person says, "There are still bond investors, ? So I think all that is true. So that is not so disappointing. That's kind of what you'd expect from bond investors. This was a little more alarming. YouTube star Mr. Beast is moving into financial services, and you're thinking to yourself, like, please don't let this include crypto. And then you read the article, and it says things like this. A company application filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office on October 13th listed plans for a mobile app and online services for a range of banking, financial advisory, crypto exchange, and other services. So unfortunately, it looks like we are going to be dealing with Mr. Beast in crypto. I have a strange feeling it's not just going to be like, the Mr. Beast swap, centralized crypto exchange. I'm sure, to whatever extent he can get into all kinds of weird stuff like a Mr. Beast meme coin, LPing on his Mr. Beast DeFi platform. I'm sure whatever he's allowed to get into, he'll get into all the weird stuff there. So that might be on the way. And I think one of the bad things. So one of the great things about having an administration that's so pro crypto is that we can do all the crypto stuff we've always wanted to do, right? We can actually move forward with all the good crypto stuff we wanted to do for a long time. The bad part about that is that we also end up with Mr. Beast crypto. So because the same rules that will apply to us trying to do good crypto things are going to apply to Mr. Beast crypto. So I mean, it could get really bad. We could end up with Mr. Beast crypto. Name your most hated star in Hollywood. Like, I think they're all going to figure out how profitable financial services is, and anybody with a big enough platform, if they can figure out how to jump through all the hoops to provide financial services, they're going to want to, because being a bank is such a profitable business. It's like so absurdly profitable. If they're willing to go through the administrative hassles, I think they're all going to want to do it. I'm personally worried about things getting real wild, like, Kardashian financial services. This could be a nightmare. S. Walker says, sure wish John O'Connor would do an Africa update. That program appears dead, unfortunately. So it's going to be RealFi. So all that stuff is getting wrapped into RealFi, and there's going to be a real big launch, no pun intended, real big launch of RealFi next year. And John O'Connor is actually going to talk about it at Dubai, what's it called? Dubai Finance Week. I might be messing up the name of the conference, but a gigantic conference happening very soon in Dubai. And John O'Connor is going to be speaking at it along with Charles. They might have some cool announcements. Charles has kind of hinted in his most recent video. There might be some cool announcements there. But I think we're going to see a lot more about RealFi from John O'Connor, including the RealFi stuff they're going to do in Africa. Cardano Universe says, that's why you're told to get your crypto off of exchanges and self-custody. Self-custody is the only security for crypto users. I agree. Night is the privacy solution. Yep. Everything good is bad. Nuclear energy, good. Nuclear boom, bad. Crypto, same way. True. Get ready for Beast Cam. Beast Scam. Get ready for Beast Scam. Yeah, I mean, the one thing, I mean, like the Mr. Beast Industries, which I guess will be the parent company running the financial services business, is like a $400 million revenue company. So it's pretty huge. So I'm hoping they have, Mr. Beast is a lot more, he's huge. So when you have a $400 million company, there's going to be a certain level of sophistication going on there. I hope that carries over I hope that exists with Mr. Beast Industries or whatever the parent umbrella entity is. And I hope that carries over to what they do in crypto. I hope it's fine if they do something with a certain level of sophistication. If it's Beast Scam, that could be really bad for crypto, because I think a lot of young people would get sucked into that. Sub-Zero 67 says the Rock centralized exchange. I would definitely rather go to the Rock centralized exchange than the Kardashian centralized exchange, but I think we've all got ones we would not love to see. I'm all in on Cardano Bank in Wyoming. So Charles, if you are listening, that'd be great. I mean, I think, it's the whole crypto banking in Wyoming thing. The barometer on that for me is Caitlin Long's Custodia Bank. Man, they suffered so much under the last administration. They're just finally sort of getting to the point where they can, begin to start doing all the things they should have been able to start like years and years ago. So I think the first thing is the Cardano banks or the crypto banks like Custodia Bank and Kraken, I know is trying to do a big thing in Wyoming. There's a few of them that actually have personnel in Wyoming doing things. And I think all of those got to get off the ground and kind of like find safe footing before we could ever dream of a Cardano bank in Wyoming. But I like the sounds of that, to be honest with you. That sounds great. Jordan Belfort Financial Services, that could happen. Actually, I mean, he's kind of the intermediary who gets disintermediated though. Apparently his chocolate is great. I haven't tried it. Yeah, there's a bunch. All the crypto, when Caitlin Long started launching Custodia Bank, I think there were several different crypto companies who saw that Wyoming was a crypto friendly place, and they were all kind of trying to do the same thing. They were all trying to set up operations and even had personnel permanently stationed in Wyoming. So yeah, so there's a bunch of crypto companies were trying to do the same thing in Wyoming. And I think as soon as Caitlin Long couldn't get a Fed master account, everybody knew what that meant instantly. It means you can't have a routing number, and you can't have a routing number, you're not much of a bank. So that's the way all that went. I think that's about all of the news for today. I'm hoping we don't have a big black swan event in 2026 before we get to some good numbers for Cardano. I'm hoping we do well. I hope Cardano starts doing well in the valuation department before we have any big black swan events in 2026. Not that we're going to have any. I'm just saying they will happen in the future. I'm hoping they don't happen before we see some good things for the entire crypto space outside of Bitcoin, especially for Cardano, because like we talked about, you've got to go through that whole period where everything sucks, everything suffers. It's like everything's going to go down with the ship. And then as soon as the government starts administering the medicine, that's when crypto shines. I hope we don't go through that. I hope we just sort of like have this nice glide next year and good things start happening. But I think it is important to keep in mind when the black swans do happen and the government has to do the big prints to get out of it, that's when crypto will shine. So at Cardano, thank you for joining. BindoCam says before the stimmy checks, Cardano Universe says, I think we have suffered enough. I agree with that. I hope everybody's having a great week. I hope you're looking forward to a good rest of your week, and I will talk to you soon.